In the Door with COPYCATT. Also, Behind the Door, our podcast, where we interview our guests on the more philosophical, emotional, artistic side of music. But this is In the Door, so let's go in the door.
I just realized that right before you guys hopped in, I'm so tired. My shirt's inside out. I don't know whose beanie this is. Sound design. Let's just hop right into it because it's such cool sound design. Let's break down right in the drop the first big bass synth that comes in.
That's actually, so this one. I mean, there's a bit of Foley and like grain layering in there, but the main bass is actually, it's like this weird Frankenstein of a few FM8 basses I made. I've actually split the same bass up. What I've done is I've actually made a few different FM8 basses, and I kind of liked the tone of all of them because I'll make like 10-second phrases of that bass. There were certain parts of it that I really liked, and I kind of wanted to hear them all together. So I literally like faded them, like the best bits of all of them side by side. So it would kind of like scrub through all of the best bits, kind of like a little like montage. I put that phrase into a sampler and messed with that. So the bass looks like this. All right. I've also split it. So I've got a low pass one and a high pass one. I was like super custom with the tone. I don't normally do this. This is just like as a weird occasion where I just like mess around with it.
This what you have in this sampler? Okay, yeah, in the sampler right here. No, that's a sampler. Is it a sampler? Am I going crazy?
It's sampler, I think. Wait, no, maybe it's simpler.
But simpler is a sampler.
Sorry, it's really early. Basically, you went into FM8 and you made a bunch of basses and you rendered them out into one audio file. And you kind of like how you said, like you made a montage or like a Frankenstein bass, where it's like you took the best parts and then you faded them all together so they're all in one piece, and then you consolidated that and dragged that into the simpler. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So I made a bunch of different basses and bounced them all out separately, and then just like chopped out the bits that I liked, which they're all kind of based around kind of 808-ish waveforms. I guess they were sort of simple. Like some of them are pretty close to just like 808-ish shapes. The reason it kind of works for bottom end and top end is that with FM8 and with operator, just FM synth in general, I can be kind of more subconscious, rather where with some real digital synths, I find you get a really dodgy bottom end. Then I've taken the best bits of that phrase, that montage that I made, and basically split it off into top end and bottom end. So I've taken pretty much the most bottom endy 808 part of the bass and used that as the bottom. And I've made like this MIDI bend here. And then the top end is a different part of the phrase, but I guess because it's the same note, I wasn't really particularly theoretical about this. I was kind of tactile. I just felt it out until it felt right. I high passed this one. So this is laid over the top. And so there's little bits where I've dropped the actual, if you look at the automation here, I've dropped the high pass down to sort of below your low mid so you can hear some of the vowelyness in the bass. And I sort of tweaked that throughout the song where I felt like I wanted to just duck in with a little bit of that like Neuro growliness. And then there was parts where I just wanted to be more bassy with a little bit of like Foley top end kind of thing. So the two of them together kind of sound like this. And it's good because it gave me like, I wasn't using two different Neuro basses. I was using the same bass kind of, or the same tone, but I could decide where I wanted the sub hits to be and all the emphasis without using a different bass. I was kind of like using the same tone.
The way that you're high passing the top end of the bass here is that you're doing it through the simpler. Is there a reason why you did it through the simpler as opposed to through like an auto filter or anything?
Not really, actually. I feel like I might have actually just done some high passing and stuff and then added effects on later, but my EQ is pretty like loose, like arbitrary. I just boosted some and then added distortion. I've pushed the bottom end a bit into the saturator. It's creating a little bit of tone, and then I'm OTTing it, just to keep everything sort of flat. But I think I might have added that later, and I've just started with the most available filter there was. I didn't add one. I just used the one that was in the auto filter because I don't think there's an envelope on it or anything.
So when you're doing these type of Neuro basses and you have the filter, because that is a huge part of like the Neuro basses, that like for those who don't know, the filter cuts in and cuts out, kind of like almost seemingly random. I didn't realize that you would use a steeper slope for that. So here you're using a 24 pulse slope. In the past, I've used a 12. Have you found more success using a 24 or higher?
I mean, it's really dependent on how much tone you're trying to get out of your filter, but like a steeper slope will give you like a much more distinct resonance. Like if you're going for vowel-y sounds and like you want to hear like a kind of sound out of it, a sharper, like a steeper slope will give you that sort of distinct sweep.
So where it kind of looks like there's two notes laid on top of each other for that bass and sub. Are they slightly offset to give a bit of a like a slide from one note to the next? So there's one there, and then there's also one further along as well.
I think this chopping I've done here, actually, if I look at where the MIDI notes start, yeah, that's just that's me being floppy. I'm just using one MIDI note from that, and I've just like chopped it out of a phrase. Yeah.
Just to confirm as well, so where you got say on like that clip, is that to create like a slide sort of thing from one note to the next?
Yeah. So I've got portamento on it, and I'm just like doing a quick, making the sub kind of dip up for a real quick sec to kind of give it like a shake or like a woof kind of sound. Yeah.
I always forget where the voices setting is in Simpler because I tend to use sampler.
With this one, I literally just set glide. I don't know if you've got, I can't remember if you've got voices with Simpler, maybe with Sampler, but with Simpler you just click glide and it'll just do it, and then you can see portamento time here.
Yeah, I must be thinking of sampler things. In sampler it defaults to 6 voices, I think. So you have to manually set one, otherwise it'll just play 2 at the same time.
I've only been using Ableton since the beginning of this year properly, so I'm a little bit sketchy on some of it, but I think that's how it is.
Which is super cool. If you look down in the dock down there, you can see FL Studio on a Mac. That's pretty dope. Can you explain how you got that on your Mac?
Initially, I got this Mac like 3 years ago. So back then, FL Studio put out like a public beta, and it was like their Mac version of FL Studio. That's how they pitched it. When I looked into it, it was basically just a wine bottled version of FL Studio, which is Windows only. So to download it, I downloaded this version of FL Studio, which came with a wine bottler set, has all of the bare minimum Windows subfolders, and installs that on your Mac rather than having to do like a partition or anything like that. It just installs a set of Windows subfolders. So I have a mini version of Windows on my Mac that just runs FL Studio. But then the dumb thing was they released an update for FL Studio that they didn't release it with the like Mac beta thing. So to update it, I had to go through this really weird process of like going into the run command in the window in the wine bottler. But what they did is they put like a date cap on FL Studio. So because it was a public beta, it meant that anyone could try it, and then it would expire after a while. So what I have to do now, if I ever want to open FL Studio, is change the date to pre-May 2014 to open it. So up until this year, that's what I did every single time. And then I'd like go to check my Facebook, and it'd be like, your computer has the wrong date. You can't use the internet. It's exhausting. So I got over it.
Dude, that sucks.
Half the plugins didn't work either. I couldn't get Massive to work. I had to like resample everything, like record it into a sampler and then load it in. That's like been the last 3 years of producing on FL Studio. Oh, you just get used to it, I feel like. You don't realize it sucks until you look at everyone else's setup and you're like, oh, wow, you can just use MIDI with Massive. And it's just like, that's a normal thing, except when you're used to not doing it. I don't know.
Did you feel creatively held back by having to kind of do that weird workaround in FL, or did you get so used to it that you could still almost make anything you wanted anyway?
I mean, you do get used to it, but I mean, obviously once when I started playing with Ableton, being able to just load a Massive patch in and just like play with the MIDI, that was something I enjoyed. I was like, oh crap, I've been missing out. But I guess you do adjust to whatever it is you're doing. There's just pros and cons. That's all it is. Like I found a workflow the same way, like in adapting to Ableton, I've lost some things that I had with FL in terms of just like some of the plugins and some of the like sampling methods I had were a bit different. There's pros and cons to whatever setup you've got, and you just adapt and develop a workflow. So I just worked around it, I guess.
Do you tend to work on sound design as a whole separate process to writing the track, or is it a bit of both?
I mean, it's all, a bit of both, honestly. Like I'll have some sessions, because sound design's kind of the thing I enjoy the most. Like songwriting is something I've had to spend a couple of years, like just like looking at and reassessing, because that's where I sort of fall short. But sound design, there's sometimes where I just feel like doing sound design. So I'll do a big session. I eventually, after a while, figured out that I was doing new sounds nearly for every track, on top of just having random times where I do sound design. So I started saving them into like consolidated. Well, consolidated is a pretty poorly applied term here, because it's not very concise, but I started saving drums and basses and stuff, so I don't have to do new sound design for every track.
Did you coin the term NeuroHop?
No, that was Kursa. Yeah, I think that was like 2011 or something. He came up with that. because it was like hip hop / neuro drum and bass, and it was kind of a joke, and people just adopted it. He actually has a song called NeuroHop. I'm in the Wikipedia page for some reason for being like a founding member, but I feel like I'm just like a disciple.
When I first listened to your music, that's kind of what I got. It was that like the sound design was definitely like neuro drum and bass kind of vibe, and then it kind of felt slower, like it was like a hip hop beat. And so now that like we're kind of looking at this, yeah, you're at 87, which is like a prime hip hop BPM. So tell me about some of the characteristics of NeuroHop.
Hip hop is a big influence for that with me. Koan sound, I'd say, like for a lot of people who are into neuro and NeuroHop and that sort of thing, Koan sound is like a massive influence. So they introduced me to a lot of the themes that I work with now. Their style and a lot of their mid-tempo stuff kind of got me into listening to hip hop. So artists like Jay Dilla and Madlib and that sort of thing sort of inspired some of the more looser kind of like mid-tempo feels I've got going on now. Like say with my drums. This is a pretty weird rhythm, but if you look at it, based on what I've learned from like Jay Dilla and Madlib and that sort of thing, I do a lot of offbeat drum rhythms. So like this snare here is a bit early, which is like very kind of Jay Dilla, I'd say. Like a lot of Jay Dilla's stuff is very like, so he's just a hip hop artist, is like a lot of his stuff is like he has early snares or late hi-hats. So all that sort of stuff gives it more of like a loose on beat feeling rather than like just a straight kind of like cut up into clean sections feeling. Kicks as well. This one I didn't, but I'll often, with anything on the half beat, with hip hop stuff, I'll like push them late a bit. Gives this really interesting kind of like drive because there's less of a gap between the kick and the snare on your half beats. It's a rabbit hole, that one, like offbeat drums. You can just like dig really deep into mathematically how it works. I think I kept a lot of the kicks in this one pretty much on grid. Oh no, there's a little bit of a late one there. That's sort of to give more of like swing. You can like cut, instead of cutting a beat up into quarters, you cut it up into sixths, and you've got like, I feel like that's the closest thing to perfect swing is like if you cut a beat up into sixths. So I've sort of pushed this kick forward towards landing on a sixth grid. So if I do triplet grid here, you should be able to see it. So that would be a sixth of a beat there. So I've sort of pushed it a bit forward to give it a bit more swing. Little tweaks like that give it more of like a hip hop feel, because a lot of old hip hop stuff was they'd like play it on an MPC or something. And I feel like they weren't conscious of, the kind of timings they were doing. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, I want to play a rhythm that's a bit loose or whatever. So they would just kind of drum in a loose way. But that's what it looked like when I dropped, I'd like drag, Jay Dilla's tracks onto the DAW and just look at how they lined up with the grid. And instead of just assuming that it was a mistake, I'd just be like, maybe there's a reason that sounds the way it does. So I just sort of like copied the rhythms out. So yeah, hip hop's a massive influence for NeuroHop, obviously. I guess a lot of it's rhythmic, to be honest. A lot of it is to do with rhythm and movement, everything sweeping within the drums and kind of like giving emphasis to the kick and the snare, or kind of like driving things based around the drums. That's like a big characteristic of NeuroHop, I think.
You got your kick and your snare that's going on. You move them, give them some swing and whatnot. Is there any other drum elements that you put in? Is there hi-hats? Is there crashes? Is there anything like that to kind of help aid the groove?
Yeah, for sure. I use kind of like lo-fi hi-hats I really like and that sort of thing. But I've sort of shifted a lot more towards sort of organic sounds like Foley and that for movement. Although I will generally use some kind of distinct hi-hat, lo-fi kind of sounding hi-hat, like something kind of dirty. This one has this really weird hi-hat. This. But yeah, see, this rhythm's kind of weird, like it's like sort of perfectly on grid here, and then on some of these off beats the hi-hat's a bit late. But yeah, aside from that, with this one, there's a lot of like weird Foley movement going on. And actually the lead's in there as well, because that was from a grain session. So I use a lot of like lead-in stuff with a lot of my rhythms. Even when writing melody, I'll sort of aim to lead into the next drum hit. Generally, the last half beat before the beginning of a bar, I'll use some sound to kind of lead into the next kick, and then like sweeping into the snares or kicks. So I know there's a kick here. Like that Foley bit's leading into that kick. This Foley bit's leading into the beginning of the next bar. So you can kind of hear like this like sucking sound like this. And then this here. So all of that sweeping and stuff kind of just gives the drums a lot more push. And sometimes it's good to like fake as well. So with this one, there's like kind of a sweep to where a kick would be, but there just isn't one there. It almost sweeps to like a gap, but it feels like there's an emphasis on that little chunk of rhythm where there isn't anything happening. Except except for that lead, except for that little lead stab. So it's mostly Foley, hi-hats, anything that just kind of like gives the drums push.
So you go in and you put in your drum beat, you make it a little bit off the grid to give it some groove, and then you go and you do some granular stuff like that, and then so you have the sweeps into the drum hits, whether it's a kick or whether it's snare, to reinforce that groove. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Do you find it best to work, like to get all the drums, all the little Foley noises in, all the granular bits in first, and then do the main bass sounds and stuff? Or do you kind of work with the bass the whole time?
It varies, like both Foley and some of your bass sounds. In terms of mid-range, anything aside from the actual sub and bass region, they can very much fill the same range. So like a Neuro bass can have the same effect that a Foley sweep might, if you have something that kind of has like a notch sweep through it or a filter sweep. And I'll actually sometimes, in terms of like sculpting a rhythm to give a track a particular movement, I actually might just put a low pass on a bass to specifically weave into certain drums or like to roll into certain drums. I haven't really done it much with this track, except for that high pass I've got going on. In terms of starting with one or the other, I'd just get the drum bits out first where I have a rhythm that I want, and then I'll either layer in Foley or basses. I generally prioritize my favorite sounds first. So if my Neuro basses are sounding really good, I'll just try and make something good out of that. Or if I've got a really good bunch of Foley sounds, I'll just try and make something good out of that. Because then I've just got like a good bed to kind of work with. Even if I don't have a bass phrase per se, if I've just got like a good drum beat and some, nice Foley sweeping it, making it sound good, then whatever I add to that, I know to some degree will still sound good. Neuro basses can have a very similar effect, and I actually treat them kind of the same in that I'll just make my basses sort of sweep into the drums or emphasize a drum hit.
2 questions about your kick and your snare. Number 1, what is your sidechain settings that you got going on? And number 2, do you do anything to particularly make your drums hit hard? Because they kind of, when I was listening to it, really like just smacked me in the face.
So sidechaining is pretty basic in that So generally just kick and snare, and I've only just recently started experimenting with like multi-band sidechain and that sort of thing, but literally I've done it on like 2 track ideas and I'm still not like, so this track was just like basic. I sidechain most things.
How do you like the whole multi-band sidechaining?
I feel like I don't know enough about it to make a good call on it, but I tried it on one track recently and there was just this one sound that wasn't working, and then I threw some multi-band sidechain on it with both the kick and the snare, and it was just like loud and fit with the drums so perfectly, and I was like, whoa, it just worked really well for that one sound. I tried it on a couple of other things and it didn't quite work, and that's just because of my lack of knowledge. I don't exactly know what I was doing wrong. It's just the drum group. Holy crap, I've actually sidechained the hi-hats in there. That's how sloppy I've been with this track. So I've actually sidechained to the whole drum group. It's like, so even the hi-hats are triggering it a little bit.
In sidechain settings, I've never seen a ratio that low.
So that's just for the one, that's like for the sub bass. What else have I sidechained in here? There's probably some sidechain on some of these grain sounds, although I think I've done audio fades for a lot of this, just for a bit more control. Oh no sidechain for the top end.
With that ratio so low, does that give you a specific sound that you just like? Is it more of like a gentle sidechain, so it's not so extreme, or?
I think with sidechain is probably one of the things I think about the least in some ways. Like that one, I think it's honestly that I just haven't even looked at the ratio. I've just like dropped the threshold down to the point where it's pushing the volume down enough, so I'm more listening to what it's doing to the sound. But even then, the fact that the hi-hats are going through it is kind of like, maybe I didn't. I know sometimes I actually doubled up on that. I've actually done volume fades as well as, see, I don't have reasoning for this. This is what's bugging me. I don't want to like make a statement and be like, this is how you should do it. Generally, I think I generally do bump the ratio up a bit higher, but just with this particular sound, I think I just pulled the threshold down until it was ducking the volume enough. And I was like, yeah, I'm happy with that. I didn't want it to like push it down too much. But I've also done this random volume fade here for this one a little bit.
If I remember correctly, I think 2 is the default, and I think that's the default release time. So I'm guessing you put it on and then pull down the threshold. I suppose the threshold is slightly lower than Wyatt might be used to seeing it as well, which is kind of why the ratio might look fractionally low, because you can get the same result mathematically by putting the threshold down further.
I mean, you can see I haven't changed the attack or the release. I'm pretty sure that's the default. So I think I've just chucked it on and just pulled the threshold down. Yeah. And I think now I've started doing it where I'll actually, if I'm using a drum group like that and I only, I don't want the hi-hats to come through, then I'll just use the EQ setting so I can solo out a band and actually just, just use the bottom end of the drum group rather than having the hi-hats.
How do you keep organized in a project like this? Because I suppose it might make sense to you when you're working on it, but certainly at a glance, it looks quite hard to keep track of what's going on from it.
I'm not going to lie, I'm struggling a bit. Like, this project is a real messy one. And I think because of how I learned to write in FL Studio, like FL Studio, you've just got like a big canvas and everything you put on it is confined to like patterns or individual audio files. So patterns would be like MIDI groups, but with as many sounds as you want in them, and it just kind of shows you like a rough representation of all the MIDI clips sitting next to each other. And so I kind of got used to just putting sounds all bunched together the way I was looking at them. And so with Ableton, I'm still like consolidating my workflow a bit, and because I've done so many bits of sound design, like I've just got the weirdest named things sitting here that are not being used. This is probably one of my most messy projects. In terms of finding stuff in projects, all I've started doing is just moving stuff to the top. So if I know I'm using the sound and there's a whole bunch of sound design crap in between, I'll turn off the things that I'm not using and then just move them to the bottom. So everything that I need is sitting at the top. But with this one, it's pretty sprawled out.
Don't know if you guys have seen, but the new version of Ableton that's coming out earlier in the 2018 will have groups within groups, which should make organizing quite a lot easier.
I'm starting to use a little bit more groups. Like I've only done it a bit with the drum group. I'm finding groups are super handy for just keeping stuff together. That's the furthest I've gotten with that, I think.
Not to make anyone jealous, but I'm actually recording my vocals through Ableton 10 right now, and it's pretty freaking dope.
Some of the stuff you were telling me about Ableton 10 the other day, I was like, this sounds so good.
The beta of it is better than the full version of Live 9, man. It's so good.
And so little shortcuts and stuff.
Question for you.
When you first pulled it up, it looked like parts of this project was up to like 10 minutes in length and maybe even longer. What's going on there?
So what I've done here, I'll generally have like this track in particular, I had a lot of goes at writing stuff with the same sounds. So I think I've probably had like 6 or 7 different bashes at trying to write a drop out of the sounds I've made, because like I guess that's kind of my bent on writing songs, is I start with sounds that I like and then I'll kind of just try and make them work together. So I think the first drop is this is it. I guess it had some ideas in it that I kind of liked, but it just was too messy for me. Like it felt a bit all over the place. So I've got a whole bunch of ideas like that just sitting in the project, or sometimes it'll be a really close duplicate to a drop that I'm working with. And I started to get to a point where I was going to make a change and I was like, I don't know if this is going to be a good idea. So I'm just going to copy this and leave it somewhere else while I like delete this section, and or like I'll delete this whole set of drums and put something else in. My room is kind of like a similar representation of what I do, is just like when I'm not wanting to use something right now, just like put it on a chair or something, just like leave it there. That's what I do in projects. I'll put an idea to the side and just like keep it there because I might use it or I might not.
That's really cool. So just so that I understand what you're saying, so like you'll make an idea and you're like, maybe I want this later, maybe I don't, and so you'll copy that over, like clear like 6 minutes over into your project file just to have it out of the way, but have it if you need it. And then if you do it multiple times, so be it. And then if you want to go back and take it and use it, you can go back and grab it and bring it into like the main part of your project. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it might be like a little piece of an idea that I got right, and when I've had a new attempt, I've done everything better except like, I don't know, maybe the Foley movements and the other idea were just better, so I can just take a piece of that and put it back in. So it's good to just have it sitting there and you can go back and listen, and also you can check your progress. So instead of like saving a new version of the project, you can just scroll across and listen to that totally different use of those sounds and see if you've done a better version or not, rather than having to like close it down and reopen the other version.
And is that a pretty essential part of your workflow? I mean, do you do that in like every project file?
I do. In all the songs that I've finished, I find there's a degree of that, yeah, where I've just like, when it's getting down to like the finer details of the groove and that sort of thing, and I'm pretty close to being happy with it, but I want to make a drastic decision and just trying something completely different, you know, for the risk of screwing up an idea that's, you know, at 80%, instead of, you know, like deleting a section to rearrange it or whatever, I'll just keep it in the exact condition it's in, where I know I'm kind of happy with it, and just have another go. And usually I'm happy with the decisions I made, but it's almost just like I don't want to take the risk of deleting it.
Do you also master in the same project then, or do you export it, or just export a region and then master that? Or?
When I have done mastering for myself, so this track I actually sent off to another guy to get mastered, and I guess that's a creative energy thing for me. I like to be able to just send it off and let someone who has the creative energy, you know, who's hearing it for the first time, just have a go at polishing it up, mastering. I like that, but at the same time, when I have mastered it, I like to bounce out just because it's, you know, I mean, it's easier on CPU. I don't know if there is like a perk to doing it in the project, like in the same project, but when I've done it, I just like to bounce it out. So I'm not thinking about, you know, I'm not making a random sound design tweak while I'm just trying to master it, you know, because like you can nitpick for, you know, forever. You can tweak that last 2%, and I just don't want to think about that.
A common thing quite a few people struggle with is almost deciding when the track's finished, because especially with all this kind of detailed music, you can almost keep adding new things and changing things forever. So how do you kind of know when the track's done, or do you not really know?
It's hard, honestly. I feel like I always feel like I'm cutting it short when I finish a track. I try and write 2 separate drops generally. That's where I'm sort of at the moment. So I've done like this first drop here, and then I had like this second. I find once I've got the sections down packed, I've got the main things where they need to be, like I know that the arrangement is right, I'll end up just listening to it over and over and just like smoothing over the transitions. And then I guess when it's at a point where there's nothing too jarring and I can listen to it the whole way through without like really cringing at something, I'll cut it there. But I'm never 100% happy. Like I'm always like, all right, I just need to get it out, or I'm like past the deadline or something like that. So yeah, I'm never 100% satisfied, but I feel like you don't regret it later. Like I find a lot of the time there might be little things you nitpick, but once it's up there, it's like, I don't know, I could be investing my creative energy into a new idea.
At the very end of the song, you have this vocal going on and it sounds like stretched and all kinds of stuff. What did you do to it? That was pretty cool.
So I guess it's become like a trope now, which I learned from Space Laces, which was to put like little, I guess it's a meme, I guess, at the end of my song. It's terrible. With this one, I actually made like 2 or 3 and trialed them. So that's become a creative process in itself, which is kind of cringy. Okay, so I actually have a bit of corpus on this one, which I have the automation for. So I've actually done a couple of dumb things here. Not dumb, just strange and totally useless. Where with the corpus, I've actually like tuned the corpus, and I figured out you can do this with MIDI now, which is so much better than the way I've been doing it. I've been tuning it by ear with this. I did like 3 different notes of me saying the word bees. And each time I've tuned the corpus to that note and then like played with the decay and the radius to make it like ring out. Yeah, so this little like ring note here is like just the decay being maxed out. And I've bent the tune ever so slightly to kind of make it decay. And there is a little bit of warping in this. Oh no, this has just been resampled, I think. I think most of it is just that corpus. And then there's... So that's Johnny Pearson from Night Owl Collective. Yeah, I just took the little inhale he did at the end of his laugh and stretched it a bunch. And there's, corpus on that as well.
I always forget about corpus, though. Corpus is so freaking weirdly cool.
You can make basses straight up just with corpus. Like I started doing it where I'd just use like a little click or something to trigger the corpus. And then I'd use like maybe the tube or the pipe setting and just make it resonate and then apply a whole bunch of effects to that. And because it creates a full spectrum of this like really cohesive set of harmonics, it's just like this perfect little ringing bass. It actually comes out sounding really good sometimes.
What warp modes were you using? I saw you use Beats. Did you use the grain warp mode earlier on as well? Or
yeah, Beats for that one. So that was just for like a kind of clicking repeat sound. Yeah, texture for that one. I've been using a little bit of Complex Pro at the moment. Particularly for vocals, it's good because it has that formant, like it recognizes formants. So if you like did flick it on and you want it to retain some of the sound, like some of the like harmonic content while you just pitch the root note down, you can leave your formants up, which is kind of handy. If I pitch that down, that formant kind of retains some of the like harmonic shape, whereas if I just knock that right down, I've been enjoying that lately. That's kind of handy.
What was the most difficult part of this track? And I suppose, what was the most difficult part for you? Was it the songwriting or the mixing? Or?
Mixing, I think actually it would have to be songwriting. And like obviously the scattered bunch of ideas here is kind of evidence of that. I had so many different goes at trying to come up with the second drop. And even once I'd come up with it, I just wasn't 100% sure. And the label that I'm working with, I had to get so much feedback on arrangement from them, because sometimes I find like I had 4 different drop ideas that I was all relatively happy with. But the one that I featured first kind of defined how you heard the rest of the track. So I had to get someone else to actually listen to it and say, oh no, this is the one that I really like. And this one like hits me hardest. And then this second one feels like a really good follow-up. So I spent a lot of time on that, and also just deciding how long my section should be, because I had a bad habit of making stuff way too long. So this track, it was originally probably 5 minutes long. And when I got some arrangement feedback, we cut it back to like 3.5 minutes. That was probably the hardest part for me, was just making arrangement decisions and songwriting, and then getting this second drop to have a rhythm that felt right without being too close to the original idea.
Basically, if you woke up tomorrow and everyone forgot and no one remembered it and you wanted to release it again, would there be anything that you would do different in this project?
Yeah, actually, there's this section. So I found now, despite how much feedback I got on arrangement, maybe I'd probably end up doubting this later and just going back to what I've got now. But this second drop, I found it actually from a lot of my friends listening to it, the best reaction I got out of it, out of all the drops I'd put into this song, was the second half of the last drop, which was basically the original idea before I changed the lead sound, which is the different lead sound as the one you hear now in the first drop. So this idea here. Just like a really powerful So I found when I was showing a few friends this song, and they'd listen the whole way through the song and be like, yeah, this is sick. Get to that drop and go, oh man, that drop idea is so good. Because it's the same idea as the first one, but it seemed that they didn't really feel it up until they heard that lead. And I don't know, that might have just been their reaction to the whole track. But I always felt like that was the part that got the best reaction, despite it's only a slight variation between this beat and this beat, which is just... It's just that big difference. But even in saying that, I still really like the sort of weirdness of the original, like the initial lead that I have in the drop. So I might change that. I feel like every time I go back to this project and I was just like looking at some of the other ideas I had in here, there's some elements that at the time, because I'd like spent so many hours into creating these drops, that I got sick of them and created something different. Now that I'm listening to them with a fresher mind, some of the ideas that I threw out because I wasn't into them at the time because I just heard them too much, they're actually a bit better than I thought. So I'd probably reintegrate some of the things that I took out.
Would you like our feedback on your song?
Yeah, no, I definitely love your feedback.
So the first feedback, your arrangement view is extremely small and it's kind of giving me anxiety. Just remember that you can press Option Command B and it'll close your browser.
So good.
And also your overview up top. Do you use your overview very much?
Not really, except just to even then I just drag around like this. So no, I actually didn't know if you could shrink that.
Go to the view up top.
Man, oh yes, just
there you go. Awesome.
No.
I learned something myself as well.
No, that helps a lot. I'll definitely use that now. Wait, because you taught me the hotkey with the browser and like every day I've produced since you told me that, I've used that.
That's the first bit of feedback, because I remember you told me that like you had this small little window of thing, and I was like, dude, he really does. Like it's just tiny little. And then I would say, since you're into a huge part of hip hop is your influence, obviously, in NeuroHop. Have you ever gotten into scratching?
Only just recently, because I won a set of turntables just from this random comp I did, and I never really liked the sound, like maybe a little bit, but I was like, I don't get it. And then I started actually playing around, and there's something physically really fun about it. So I've just started messing around with just like crossfader and
So you actually really do have like turntables for you to do that on.
Yeah.
Because what I was going to say, for all those of you listening, there's a Mad Zach tutorial that shows you how to take your Ableton push, and turn it into basically a turntable so that you can scratch with your push. It's insane, because basically, because you're thinking right now, like, well, how would you do that? Would you just use like the encoders? Would you use the knobs to scratch? Actually, you have it mapped to you have like certain parameters and certain devices that are up to help you create the effect of scratching, but you just threw it through the buttons. And so you load up a sample and you can like type in your rhythm and everything. And like, it's really crazy, go check it out. And so that's because do you have a push?
Yeah, I have the first one.
Okay, so I'd highly encourage you to check it out because it's just really, really cool because, with hip hop, because I come from a hip hop background, scratching was a huge thing in hip hop, like a gigantic thing. And so now I'm just thinking, like, what part of hip hop have I not seen incorporated in what you're talking about right now in this like NeuroHop thing? And I haven't seen scratching incorporated. And I agree that, like, for the most part, like, scratching is pretty cool, but some of it is kind of I guess you would say.
I guess it's a bit arbitrary. Like you kind of just like throw scratch. Like some tracks I've heard it on, they just throw it on. Like they don't really take time to articulate the rhythm. I think Lone Drum is one of the only dudes I've heard do it really well.
Yeah.
Like he takes good sounds and scratches them in.
Kind of feel like you with your sound design chops and like your rhythmic chops, your arrangement chops. I feel like you could do something really, really cool with scratching because you've done cool crap with other crap. I think that could be really, really cool. But as far as, and I know that like obviously the Ableton suggestion I have and the scratching one, I mean, they're kind of suggestions. They're not really feedback on your song. Sorry, those were just two that came up to my mind. But so the actual feedback on your song is that it is really, really amazing. The only thing that I would have liked to see more is vocal chops, because that's a huge part of hip hop culture. You know what I mean? Is to have vocal chops in there, even if it's just like a phrase. I mean,
it's 0 hours.
Did I go through it? Yeah, that's my club. Sorry. There's some vocal chops for you.
The reason why is because vocal chops, for those who don't understand, so vocal chops, hip hop vocal chops and EDM vocal chops, they're two different things, because usually EDM vocal chops are like tuned and they have a melody, because now we have the technology to go in to grab a phrase and to chop it up and tune it and, format shift it or do whatever we want. But back then it was like Biggie Smalls saying, I'm going back to Cali, and you just go and you go like Cali back to you know what I mean? And you like kind of like do it in the order that you want to. I don't know. I kind of feel like combining modern day EDM vocal chopping technology with that of, old school hip hop, I kind of feel like it would be so cool.
And do some sick effects to that. That would be sick.
One thing that I really like doing with this sort of music is, well, I'm sure you probably do it at some stage as well, is to kind of create some of those like sweepy noises and stuff in the main drop section. You take like your main bass sound or your main drums and then bounce out a super wet reverb version, like 100% wet. And then by kind of chopping it up and applying fades and stuff, you can almost turn that reverb into like a rhythmic instrument almost, but in a way that's not kind of super obvious. That's also really cool, because I find especially through headphones, it really takes it into a whole new sort of dimension in terms of coolness.
Yeah, it's got that width. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of like sweeps around and it just gives like a really, really surreal sort of effect, which is cool. And then another one, which I've no idea how well it'll work in this particular case, but something I've been thinking about recently, is just to do some really weird like tempo automation stuff like in the middle of the track, because some people do automate the BPM of the track, especially more so in the middle, but I don't see too many people doing like really wild like BPM automations going from like 80 to 20 for like 4 seconds and then back up to 80 and then up to like 200 and stuff. So it's a pretty weird idea, but I think you could kind of get away with it for like 20-30 seconds, providing it then went back to normal at some stage.
Yeah, just experiment. I think it'd be for like pads and that sort of thing, that'd be kind of handy just to be able to space things out.
Yeah, because you can get some really weird results because different things get affected by the tempo in different ways, because some things are warped, some things aren't. I find you get really surreal results because some things don't get changed by the BPM and then other things get changed wildly depending on the warp mode and stuff. So especially with like time-based, not time, with sync-based delays and stuff, the delay tail time is changing. So like the delay gets pitched up and down.
Yeah, I thought about that.
Such a good idea. I don't think we've ever tried this before, but do you have any questions for us about your song?
If I had to ask a question, and I guess it'd just be to like all listeners in general, I think one thing I've been trying to do is find the focal element of the songs I write, because a lot of it is just based on sound design. So I don't focus too much on the main element. I have a rough idea of it, but like what's kind of like the standout elements for you, or the things that stick in your head about this song? Like what bits actually caught your attention and what was just kind of like, I guess you didn't think about?
So for me, my favorite bit, just because I don't see enough people doing it, are all those like intro and outro, like unique things you do. Like even though I really like the main bit of your track, I kind of feel like there are loads of main bits of people's tracks I like, whereas I don't see like anywhere near enough people doing those really cool intro and outro bits. It kind of gives it gives your track identity in a way that's missing in,
Oh yeah, right, with like the vocal samples and stuff.
takes your track from being just another really good track of this genre and kind of gives it more identity. So yeah, I say overall that's my favorite. And then some of the bass sounds as well, which are just really nice, for lack of a better word.
Mine was, so like, it's super cool that you mentioned Jay Dilla, because like for those who don't know, the joke with Jay Dilla is that like you always know it's a Jay Dilla track because you get like the stank face on. You're like, ooh man, this is good. You know what I mean? That's really funny that you bring that up, because when I was listening to this, I was head bobbing. I was like, ooh, like this is good, you know? But the reason why I was doing that, the reason why I was sticking out was because of the groove and the rhythm of the track, you know what I mean? So like to really get your head bobbing, at least for me now, is because of the groove. You know, if it's just like kick on 1, snare on 3, or snare on 2 and 4, or whatever your rhythm is, that doesn't do it for me anymore. You know what I mean? Like when I listen to, is it still called electro house? You know, like when I'd listen to that where everything's just like slammed on the grid, I don't know, you can't really like get into it. But when you get into something like this, it's like groovy and you're like, ooh, like, yeah, like that's nice. You have a really good groove going on, man. You have, I don't know, it's just like with the combination of your drums and offsetting your drums and, you know, your neuro basses with their rhythmic movements and everything, just all together, it's like in this nice little, not slammed to the grid, but not like completely off the grid either. It's like in this nice little gentle spot where it's like, oh dang. That's what sticks out to me the most.
That's awesome. That's really good feedback. Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show, dude.
It was a pleasure.